Good day and welcome to AP European History, Unit 7. We're starting the new unit today, and we're going to start with Italian unification as our main topic. The next lecture will be about German unification. So this really picks up from where we left off with the last unit and the big theme of nationalism. What we see here, if you've ever been to Rome, this monument is sometimes called the Wedding Cake. It's right in downtown Rome. It is a monument to the unification of Rome by Victor Emmanuel. Victor Emmanuel right here on an equestrian statue, called the Wedding Cake because it is, the marriage of northern and southern Italy into one unified Italian state, and because it's made out of a bunch of white stone. Some people consider it to be a hideous monument. Some really like it. It certainly is big. And you can see in its use of Roman artistry, it's hearkening back to a previous time of great Roman history. So we're gonna start by reviewing Italian history since kind of the beginning of this course, and then get into how we went from a disunified Italy into modern unified Italy. All right, so if you recall, we started this entire course with Italy, talking about the Italian Renaissance and what happened there. And this is a map very similar to what we looked at a long time ago. If you recall, northern Italy was a mishmash of small states, city-states, dominated usually by one large, wealthy city-state like Florence or Venice, Genoa, Milan, Naples in the south. All of those fairly wealthy, although relatively small populations of 40 to 60 to 80,000, but wealthy on trade, industry, banking, but unable to achieve any real measure of unity, in part because they became the kind of the playground of great powers. One great power that was deeply interested will be the Habsburgs. The Habsburgs at one point controlling Spain, Austria, and through Aragon controlling the kingdoms of Sicily and Sardinia. The French were deeply interested as well, as were sometimes the Ottomans, as they were continuing their move across the Mediterranean. So frequently, if you recall, we'll see in like the Habsburg-Valois Wars, the French will come in, and Austrians will come in, and the Spanish will come in, and at various times, all of these different city-states trying to balance off of who was best. Sometimes they invite other countries in to help them fight in wars. And it doesn't work out well for Italy in terms of unification. At one point, in fact, the High Renaissance ends when the troops of Charles sack the city of Rome, and a lot of the energy falls away from the Renaissance in Italy at all. And for the next, almost 400 years, Italy will be kept apart by these wars of dynasty. They'll be kept apart by their own rivalries between the city-states. These city-states did not like each other. They were always fighting their own balance of power, making sure Venice didn't get too powerful, which meant that alliances were always shifting. Everyone was stabbing everyone in the back. Italian politics was, and still is, deeply, deeply complicated, and your friend today is your enemy tomorrow. So that goes on for a very long time. And that takes us up to the Congress of Vienna. Again, something we left off with in last unit. And so how does the Congress of Vienna affect Italy? We didn't really talk about Italy very much because I knew we were going to talk about it in this lesson here. So we did talk about how northeastern Italy gets chopped off as a part of Austria. Lombardy and Venetia, two of the wealthiest provinces, will become part of the Austrian Empire, deeply resented by Italians. And one of the things that helps stimulate Italian nationalism is this Austrian dominance. In addition, the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, which is pretty much all of southern Italy and Sicily, ruled by a Spanish Bourbon. And finally, the Kingdom of Sardinia and Piedmont, over here. So those are the three main powers that you saw. You still have the Papal States in the middle, and a couple other states, but really you have Austria in the northeast, Sardinia and Piedmont, and the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies. All of this had come out of Napoleon's attempt to kind of unify Italy under his brother, Joseph Bonaparte. You may remember him, who later went on to try to hold on to Spain. All of this, anyways, the big story is it leads to resentment towards the Austrians and some of the beginning glimmers of a desire for independence. But there's also, in the Italians, a desire for liberalism, a desire for new government, a desire for something better, more democracy, republican forms of government, as opposed to, as you can see, two major kingdoms and an Austrian empire. So what happens next? Where do these dreams start? Well, they start all over the place, not always unified in exactly what they want, that we're going to see in Italy every form of nationalism you can possibly imagine, from extremely radical nationalism to extremely conservative nationalism. A lot of it begins with the Carbonari, who were a secret society of, basically the name means charcoal burners. That was one of the nicknames they had, who were dedicated to bringing down absolutist rules. And they will have chapters in most Western European countries. They started in Italy. They'll have chapters in France. They will rise in rebellion in 1820 in hopes of gathering, not necessarily unifying Italy, but in terms of getting constitutions. They wanted to make all of the monarchs in Italy declare constitutions, liberal constitutions. They'll fail. They will be inspired by the July Revolution of France of 1830, and were probably part of that, some of the French Carbonari. They rebelled in Italy, and the Austrians came in and went through pretty much every part of Italy and utterly crushed the Carbonari. And after 1830, they disappear. One of them, however, Giuseppe Mazzini, who's here over to the top right, started realizing that yes, opposing absolutist rule is very important. However, the way to do that was through nationalism. That nationalism is the way to achieve liberalism, in other words. He was a huge supporter of the people. He was not a socialist. He didn't like socialism. He kind of hated socialists and communists. But nor was he a liberal economist. Economic. One of those economists. That's it. So he's really about the will of the people. So suffrage is kind of a big part of that. Government's listening to the will of people. And he will found an organization called Young Italy after the collapse of the Carbonari. And his slogan being God and people. He's deeply religious. And he starts creating this dream of creating a unified Italy in order to bring about a liberal republic. That will be the one way that you can have true liberalism. And you can see in the flag of Young Italy over there, union and liberty. I don't know what Forza means. Unity and liberty. So union and liberty, they kind of go hand in hand. That's the way it works. He will not get his way, but he's one of the first to start spreading this gospel of nationalism, of unifying Italy. But there were other people who had different dreams. One of them was Vincenzo Ghiberto, who was a priest, a Roman Catholic priest, and who approached Pope Pius IX with some of his ideas, and Pope Pius was interested in this idea. Well, what if you had a federation of somewhat independent states, but all under a liberal pope? That the pope could guarantee this form of liberalism, and he could create a sense of national unity. They got a true Italy unified under a pope, almost like a Holy Roman Emperor or something. And Pius, he seemed intrigued. He seemed intrigued by this idea until the day when bullets started flying, and then he became super conservative and he abandoned the whole idea. So that one's not going to really work out whether. What will ultimately save the day is a conservative monarchy. That there were others who were hoping, well, what if we look at our best monarchy, which was considered to be Sardinia Piedmont, the one that it was not Bourbon, it was a truly Italian monarchy, whereas the Two Sicilies was a Bourbon one. What if they took the lead and they create a unity of Italy, and we could have a monarchy provide us the Italy that we want? So that's the dream. And here's what happens. almost 30 years of utter failure. We talked about the 1820 failures. We talked about the 1831 failure, utterly crushed by the Austrians, in large part because of Metternich. Then in 1848, if you recall, there were the 1848 revolutions starting in France and then spreading everywhere. Well, they spread also to Italy. And Italians got once again into either they were for liberalism or nationalism. There were some socialists, all wanting some type of thing. And for a few months, like happened almost everywhere in 1848, the revolutionaries were winning. The monarchs realizing, I don't want to lose my head, so let me give you a liberal constitution. Some places declared republics. It looked like this was a glorious new day for liberal constitutions, which is kind of how it looked everywhere in Europe in the first parts of 1848 revolutions. As time goes on, those don't work out. Pope Pius is like, well, this is interesting. And briefly, some people will declare a Roman republic with Pope Pius as the head of this Roman republic. Mazzini shows up, and he briefly gains power as one of the triumvirate who will rule this Roman republic. And then King Charles Albert of Piedmont decides, well, here's a great time for me to create unity in Italy. We can push back the Austrians. Austria has their own problems. Austria's having a revolution. We can win this thing. It didn't work out that way. Austria crushed the rebellion, utterly crushed the rebellion, crushes Charles Albert. The French come in to protect the Pope, because the Pope by this point is freaking out. He's like, this is nothing what I was talking about. Please help me. The French come in. They crush the Roman Republic. Mazzini, he lives past this, but he's never really heard from again in Italy. Charles Albert is so humiliated, he abdicates in favor of his son. And the 1848 to 49 Italian revolutions all end up back where they started, which was strong monarchies, Austrian dominance in northeastern Italy, nothing having been gained. Well, fourth time is the charm. Victor Emmanuel becomes the new king of Sardinia-Piedmont. His father had just abdicated, and his genius will be allowing this guy to the bottom right, Cavour, as he's normally referred to, the Count of Cavour, Camillo Benso, to become his prime minister and to lean on him for advice. Cavour is one of the greatest Italian politicians of all time that you've probably never heard of. He was, I would say, moderately conservative. He was liberal on a number of things, especially economics. And he realizes that Italy, especially Sardinia, Piedmont, has two major problems. One, they don't have much of an industry, and their economy is backwards. So Italy, especially Sardinia, Piedmont, is going to have to focus on modernization, and he will pour a lot into that in economic liberalization. He also knew they had no military might. Every time they went up against the Austrians, they were getting destroyed. They needed someone to help them beat the Austrians. So who can they look around to? Who doesn't like the Austrians? Who can they use as a bludgeon against the Austrians to get the Austrians out of Italy? So he starts looking for opportunities to gain alliances with other great nations. In 1853, Great Britain, France, and Turkey went to war with Russia in Crimea. It's called the Crimean War. Not really that important of a war, other than it was kind of the end of the Concert of Europe. The Concert of Europe's over. Metternich is gone. Now these powers that were trying to keep each other balanced are now fighting against each other, and this is the opportunity that Cavour is looking for. So he, little Sardinia Piedmont, decides to join in the war against Russia with France and Great Britain, hoping to get an in with France. He didn't think that Great Britain would be much help, but France is a neighbor. France could be huge help against Austria. And this kind of goes way back to, this is the kind of stuff that the Italians were trying to pull off during the Renaissance, and it always seemed to backfire. So is it going to backfire this time? Well, Cavour ultimately has to sit down with Napoleon and says, listen, we know you don't really like Austria. We don't like them either. What if we give you a trade? We'll give you Savoy and Nice, which are, I'll show you in a map in a second, the northwestern Italy. We'll give you those two provinces, which are, partially French, partially Italian. We'll give you those if you'll go to war and help us beat up on Austria and help drive them out. And this leads to the Second Italian War of Independence in 1859. Austria loses. France comes in. They beat up on Austria with the Italian help and drive Austria out of all of Italy except for Venetia. So Austria still holds on to Venetia. That's still going to be a problem. We still don't have a unified Italy. But Sardinia, Piedmont has won their first big victory, and they've earned their first big chunk of land. Now, to do that, they had to give away Savoy and Nice, which will rankle for some people quite a bit. At the same time, you have another Giuseppe show up, Giuseppe Garibaldi, who was from Nice and was not happy about Nice. So you've got Savoy and Nice, the regions given away were over here. Those will be given to France so that Sardinia, Piedmont can pick up land in northern Italy. So he was angered, but Cavour realized Garibaldi had a lot of energy. So instead of, and he was really afraid, so Cavour was afraid that Garibaldi would try to prompt a war with France. So he decided to redirect him and said, well, what about southern Italy down here, controlled by Bourbons? What if you go there and try to stir them up, get them to overthrow their government, and they can join Sardinia and Piedmont, and we can really make a huge step towards Italian unification. So Garibaldi will land with his troops, 1,000 red shirts, in western Sicily, in order to take over or to overthrow the monarchy of the two Sicilies. He had 1,000 troops against a relatively powerful kingdom. He shouldn't have succeeded, but he did. Against all odds, because everywhere he landed, he was greeted as a hero. Crowds will flock to him. He was loved. They thought he was great. He declares a dictatorship under the authority of Victor Emmanuel, the king of Sardinia, Piedmont. And from there, he moves across. He takes all of Sicily, moves across the Straits of Messina, and starts moving up the boot towards Naples. At that point, he needs help. That there's large fortifications that, his small number of troops couldn't take. They didn't have large artillery. And Victor Emmanuel sends over troops from Sardinia to move through the Papal States. And ultimately, they overthrow the two Sicilies, and they declare something totally new. This is no longer the kingdom of Sardinia, Piedmont. This is now the kingdom of Italy. And the king of Italy, Victor Emmanuel, the first king of Italy, is crowned on 17 March 1861, using Rome as their capital. The problem was they didn't control Rome yet. That Rome was still, and the Papal States were still under control of the papacy. But now you have everything here in red, and in pink is now under the one person of Victor Emmanuel. So now you just have these two little spots left, what to do about Rome and what to do about Venice. So this is 1861 this happens. So this is all that's happening quite quickly. And Cavour has taken his nation and has now quadrupled the size of the nation in just a few years. There'll be a third war of independence. And here Italy gets super, super, super lucky. That Austria, their main antagonist, gets busy with two other wars. So the first one, the third war of independence, Italian War of Independence, is in 1866. Austria and Prussia go to war. We'll talk about this later. Prussia just beats up on Austria. And Italy's like, oh, Austria's getting utterly destroyed. We should jump in. They did, and from that, they gained Venetia. So now that northeastern part is now theirs. Awesome. 4 years later, they're wondering what to do about the Pope. The Pope is being protected by French troops. Those French troops had been there for 30 years, protecting the papacy from all of the chaos of Italy, all these revolutions that kept breaking out, the Carbonari and whatnot. But France got involved in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, and the Prussians beat up on the French. So France had to recall its Roman garrison, bring it back to France to help try to defeat the Prussians, which means Rome is wide open. So Italy invades. Victor Emmanuel makes the decision. He tries to negotiate so that the Pope can save face and have the Pope invite him in, but the Pope is furious. He refuses. He puts up symbolic resistance. This painting here shows the troops breaking into Rome. And the Pope is basically created as a prisoner in the Vatican. But Italy's finally unified, and they'll be able to move the capital into Rome, while the Pope is in his palaces wondering, well, what do I have left? And the answer is, he had the Catholic Church, but he no longer was truly a political figure. He was no longer a figure who controlled territory. He just was the head of the Roman Catholic Church, which may have been what was intended from the beginning. But, so what does all this mean at the end? Pope Pius turned deeply, deeply conservative. One famous document he will issue is the Syllabus of Errors of 1864, in which he condemned rationalism. Not that reason is wrong, but that believing in only reason was wrong. That believing that there could not be something supernatural was a sin. Socialism was a sin, mostly because of its association with atheism. Religious liberties, also sinful. Separation of church and state, also sinful. I mean, he had a long list of things. Granted, he wasn't able to be deeply influential with those because he was trapped in his own little palace. The papacy and the Kingdom of Italy do not get along for a very long time. Even though Italians were 99.9% Catholic, the papacy, the Pope that is, and the King of Italy did not get along. And they did not work together. There was this weird quasi-legal situation where the papacy existed in Rome, but was not in Rome until finally they have the Lateran Accords in 1929, and the papacy essentially becomes how we know it today, the Vatican as an independent political entity within the city of Rome. All right. Other unresolved issues is what's sometimes called Italia Irredenta, the unredeemed Italy. Italy didn't get back everything they wanted. Especially from Austria. There was a deep desire for territories in Trent and Trieste, which are kind of on the Adriatic coast, kind of east of Venice. And they didn't get those. And that'll be one of the main reasons that Italy will go to war with the Allies in World War I. Even though they had pledged to be allied with Austria, they joined the Allies because I said, hey, you can get Trent and Trieste if you'll join us. And that's why Italy jumped in. One of the biggest problems for Italy long term will be the fact that Italy was now unified politically, but was not truly one country. It was not one people. That hundreds of years of division had created different economic systems, different political systems. The biggest one being the economic divide between a much more developed economically, industrially, wealthy banking in the north, and a much more agrarian and poor south, which it persists today. That Italians today still complain, if you're in the north, that tax money keeps flowing to the south and just seems to go into a bottomless pit. And if you're in southern Italy, complain that that you're being manipulated and used by northern Italy. So you still see these major issues today. At the end of the day, the government established by Victor Emmanuel was fairly conservative, although with some liberal reforms that, yes, there was suffrage, there was some representative government, but the suffrage was very small, and it was for the wealthy, and the representative government generally supported the wealthy. So that's the story of the wedding cake and how Italy became unified by some accidents, by some genius, and by a whole lot of blood and drive. And we'll see you for the next one.